Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus by Taylor Swift. This song comes as a request from the anthology, the Tortured Poets Department anthology. Before I begin, I want to say a word about requests in general. I'll probably take on most of your requests, but if you don't see your requests coming up, it may be just because it takes me a while to get around to it, but it also might be that I just don't find that I have anything particularly interesting to say about that song. So I'm not going to just sit here and have you watch me listen to it. Some of the songs that you bring to me are not necessarily songs that I've paid much attention to before, but when I do pay attention to them, I find something interesting to say about them. But that's not true of every song, so I'm not going to promise to do every single request that comes my way. This particular song, Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus, I think first of all something has to be said about the title of this song. I think it's a very strange title. I think it seems to place far too much importance on these particular names, and in fact I don't think they're important at all. I think I'd rather she'd called this something else. If you think you know the reason for her calling this song by this rather clumsy, awkward title, please let me know in the comments. But I suspect if you're going to connect it to people in Taylor's life or Matty Healy's life or whatever, I'll be somewhat sceptical about that because it's a kind of 6 degrees of separation thing. I think you can almost certainly find someone with those names that's connected in some way to those people, but I don't think that's particularly meaningful. And when we come to that line in the song, I'll say what I think it means. So let's dive in then to Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus.
You hologram stumbled into my apartment, hands in the hair of somebody in darkness, named Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus, and I just watched it happen.
Why does Taylor use the word hologram here? Well, part of me thinks that it's just an alternative to ghost. She's used ghost a lot in her songs, and maybe she thought she didn't want to use that image again, so she'd try something different, try hologram. Once upon a time, I worked as a chaplain in a psychiatric hospital. And it used to be, once upon a time, that people who were hearing voices, particularly people who suffered from schizophrenia, would hear the voice and they'd identify it as God or a demon, something from the religious tradition. But later on, people began to identify this with aliens. They were hearing the voice of aliens. Maybe a chip was planted in their head and aliens were communicating with them. So I think it's interesting how a shift in our culture away from a religious understanding of the world towards a more science or maybe science fiction based understanding of the world. This changed the way in which people experienced their delusional voices. So maybe here in Taylor's use of the word hologram, she's kind of moving beyond that religious mythological framework of ghosts and spirits and so on into the more sort of scientific or science fiction realm. Maybe it's a kind of post-romantic image, if you like. It also, for me, harks back to the earlier song on the album, Down Bad, which has all those sci-fi images in it. And this connects very well with the whole Star Trek universe and other science fiction franchises where people often communicate with each other via holograms. Princess Leia speaking to Luke Skywalker. The other thing about this opening line is that the hologram stumbled into her apartment. It wasn't intentional on the hologram's part. It wasn't intentional on Taylor Swift's part or the narrator's part. She came across this image. Maybe this is a reference also to the internet, to all the media that's available to us. And if, for instance, this song were about Matty Healy, say, it's not impossible that she would encounter an image, a music video, a news item, something that would be about Matty, just by sheer accident. But then we come to the line, hands in the hair of somebody in darkness, named Chloe or Sam, or Sophia, or Marcus. Okay, well, Marcus rhymes with darkness, so maybe that's why she chose the name Marcus there. But the fact that it's in darkness indicates that she doesn't know who it is. She can't see who it is, and also though it doesn't matter who it is. It also doesn't matter, notice, whether it's male or female. A very modern view of relationships and sexuality being expressed here, I think. So I don't think there's anything particularly significant about the specific names used here, other than the fact that Marcus conveniently rhymes with darkness. And then she says, I just watched it happen. There's a kind of passivity in her response to this. There's a suggestion that she could have intervened in some way, but she doesn't. She just watches it happen.
You hologram stumbled into my apartment, hands in the hair of somebody in darkness, named Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus, and I just watched it happen as the decade would play us for fools. And you saw my bones out with somebody new who seemed like he would have bullied you in school, and you just watched it happen.
Now, as we've seen Taylor do before, she flips the perspective here. The first part of this first verse is describing something that happens to her, or to the narrator anyway. But then she flips it and describes something that happens to him, as the decade would play us for fools. So this, for me, harks back to, at the very least, to Guilty as Sin, and also to Fresh Out the Slammer. The implication that a long time has passed for these two people in this almost kind of relationship, what people call a situationship these days. And she feels that over that time they've both been fools, or at least played for fools. But she imagines him seeing her out with someone else. So the way she puts that is, you saw my bones out with somebody new. So somehow she's not quite there fully in the flesh. It's just her bones that are out with this other person. It's kind of equivalent to the hologram situation. Just as he's not fully present to her in that moment when he's a hologram, so she's not fully present to him when she's observed as a skeleton out with someone else. Then she adds a kind of personal touch here. The person she's seen with seems like someone who would have bullied you in school. This paints a picture both of the person she's seen with and of the person she's addressing in this song too. It presents the image of someone who's perhaps not very large physically, who maybe would have been picked on for being small, for being maybe bookish, for being the artsy type of person, maybe for expressing some other difference in sexuality. So she's contrasting these two people, the one person that she's addressing and also this person that she was seen out with, not necessarily unfavourably, because I think we know what Taylor thinks about bullying. So she would actually have sympathy for someone who is bullied. And if the person she's addressing was bullied, she doesn't share the opinion that the bully has of that person. She would see that person as vulnerable, perhaps sensitive in some way. And then she adds, of course, and you just watched it happen. So he's also passive in this. Over this decade, she's observed him, he's observed her, and they've both just let it happen.
As the decade would play us for fools, and you saw my bones out with somebody new who seemed like he would have bullied you in school, and you just watched it happen. If you wanna break my cold, cold heart, just say I loved you the way that you were. If you wanna tear my world apart, just say you've always wondered.
This chorus here is a little heartbreaking. If you want to break my cold, cold heart, she says. Well, there are two things that come to mind here. Perhaps he's accused her of being cold-hearted at some stage and she's kind of throwing that back at him. Or perhaps she's suggesting that over this decade, over these 10 years, her heart has cooled towards him. But not completely, because it would be very easy for him to break her heart, to tear her world apart. And all he would have to do for that to happen was say, I loved you the way that you were. There's a kind of tragic element to that. Clearly, he didn't say that at the time, and if he were to say it to her now, that would break her heart, because why didn't he say it then? She's let herself change, she's let herself move on. Maybe at times in that relationship he expressed a wish that she would change, and she did over time, and now all he would have to do, he doesn't do this, at least not in the context of this song, but all he would have to do is say, I loved you the way that you were. That's kind of heartbreaking. And also, if you wanted to tear my world apart, just say, you've always wondered. Again, if you always wondered, why didn't you say something? There's a deep sadness there, I think.
If you wanna break my cold, cold heart, just say I loved you the way that you were. If you wanna tear my world apart, just say you've always wondered. You said some things that I can't unabsorb. You turned me into an idea of sorts. You needed me, but you needed drugs more, and I couldn't watch it happen.
That opening line of this verse, you said some things that I can't unabsorb. Unabsorb is a very interesting word here. She's using unabsorb as a verb, and if you look in the dictionary, there's no such word. You can't use I unabsorb or that sponge unabsorbed the water. You can say of something that it is unabsorbed. For instance, if you put a sponge into water, a lot of the water remains unabsorbed. The sponge can only absorb so much. But once it's absorbed, the sponge can't unabsorb it. There is no word, there is no verb to unabsorb something. So, very creative use of language here. And we know what she means. This is inside her now, and she simply can't unabsorb it. I can't unsee that. I can't unhear that. I can't unexperience that. Unexperiencing would be a similar word. We can't say, okay, I've had that experience, now I'm going to unexperience it. Right? That's not possible. And in the same way, unabsorbing something is not possible either. So very, very clever use of language. You turn me into an idea of sorts. I'm kind of reminded of the hologram thing again here. An idea is kind of like a mental hologram. We form an image of someone in our mind. We give them all sorts of qualities, all sorts of attributes. But it's only in our mind. We're not really like that at all. But that's what the person comes to believe about us over time. That's the way they see us. Maybe they put us up on a pedestal. Maybe they misunderstand us completely. But they have formed this image of us, this idea of us in their mind. And the reality is unlikely to match that idea. Now we get to the specific detail of this situation. You needed me, but you needed drugs more. So here we're getting some insight into why this relationship or this potential relationship wouldn't have worked at that time. The person was dependent on drugs. And as much as he might have needed her, that needed is an interesting word here rather than loved. He needed her, a suggestion that his need of her is somehow similar to his need for drugs, which is not necessarily a positive thing. But yes, you needed me, but you needed drugs more. Drugs were more important to this person at that time.
You said some things that I can't unabsorb. You turned me into an idea of sorts. You needed me, but you needed drugs more, and I couldn't watch it happen. I changed into goddesses, villains and fools, changed plans and lovers and outfits and rules, all to outrun my desertion of you, and you just watched it.
Then she moves on to kind of give us a snapshot of the 10 years that have passed since that initial relationship of some kind, whatever it was. And she talks about herself changing into goddesses, villains, and fools. And she sees herself as having played all those roles over the ensuing decade. She changed plans, she changed lovers, she changed outfits, she changed rules. Everything changed in those 10 years. Which is why him saying, now I loved you just as you were, is so heartbreaking. Because she can't go back to being that person. Too much time has passed. The moment's passed. I can't help thinking here also of the song Peter, where she talks about it being too late now. She also says that she made all these changes in her life, or she went through this, sounds almost chaotic period of her life to outrun her desertion of him. So she has a sense of guilt. This person was dependent on drugs. Perhaps they needed her, but she couldn't handle that. She couldn't deal with that. And she left him. She deserted him. And she feels guilt about that.
Been I changed into goddesses, villains and fools, changed plans and lovers and outfits and rules, all to outrun my desertion of you, and you just watched it. If you wanna break my cold, cold heart, just say I loved you the way that you were. If you wanna tear my world apart, just say you've always wondered. If the glint in my eye traced the depths of your sigh down the passage in time, back to the moment I crashed into, like so many wrecks do, too impaired by my youth to know what to do. So
if the glint in my eye traced the depths of your sigh. I'm not quite sure what she means by a glint in my eye here. When we talk about someone having a glint in their eye, we tend to think of that as something positive. Their eyes are shining, glittering. There's a hint of joy in their eye. I don't think in the context that's what she can mean here. The other possibility, I suppose, is that she's tearing up. When you tear up, your tears glisten on the surface of your eye. Maybe that's what she means here. I think that fits the context a bit better. If the glint in my eye traced the depths of your sigh. So he's expressing his, not sure that grief is the right word, but a depth of pain here, of suffering that she hears in his sigh. She hears it down that passage in time. So she's kind of implying that during that whole 10 years, she can trace it back through the sound of his sigh. There's something ongoing in his life, a kind of sigh throughout his life, and she can trace it back all those 10 years. Back to the moment I crashed into you, she says. Just as with the hologram stumbling into the room, there was nothing intentional about that. There seems to have been nothing intentional either about their initial meeting. This was a crash. More than just they bumped into each other, they crashed into each other. There's a sense that this was a somewhat violent, dangerous, chaotic encounter, this initial encounter. A car crash. Like so many wrecks do, she says. So she's describing perhaps both of them at that time in their life when they had this initial meeting. She's describing both of them as wrecks. They were damaged. And this is when they had this encounter, which had so much impact upon them. But she says she was too young at that time to know what to do. She was impaired by her youth. She was out of her depth. I guess there's the whole intensity of that encounter, there's the whole drug issue and so on. It was too much for her, and as she said in the previous verse, she deserted him, she ran away.
If the glint in my eye traced the depths of your sigh down that passage in time, back to the moment I crashed into you, like so many wrecks do. Too impaired by my youth to know what to do. So if I sell my apartment and you have some kids with an internet starlet, will that make your memory fade from this scarlet maroon?
Now she talks some more about changing and moving on. She might sell her apartment, he might have kids as someone he meets on the internet. Again, there's just that hint of the hologram here, that this is something that's happening in a kind of virtual world. Well, the virtual world is intruding upon them, and they keep encountering each other in this virtual world. So she's saying, if I move on again, if you move on again, would that make this memory fade from the scarlet maroon? So will this finally wipe out that memory? Of course, it's impossible not to think back to her song on the Midnights album, Maroon, when she talks about the colour of this memory, the colour of this relationship as something scarlet maroon. I think I'll probably do the song Maroon next on this channel, and I'll talk a little bit more about the meaning or potential meaning or meanings of maroon. But for me here, it has a kind of autumnal sunset kind of feel, with all these hints of red and perhaps brown. There's actually a kind of warmth to that colour. And despite what she's saying about this being a crash, this being a disaster in many ways, and she deserting and so on, there's that warmth in the memory. And in a way, she's really hoping that will dissipate. The changes she makes now, the changes he makes now, that it will finally get rid of this.
So if I sell my apartment and you have some kids with an internet starlet, will that make your memory fade from this scarlet maroon? Like it never happened, could it be enough to just float in your orbit? Can we watch our phantoms like watching wild horses? Cooler in theory, but not if you force it to be. It just didn't happen.
Could it be just enough to float in your orbit? I get the image here of passing jet streams like we see in the song Peter. This seems to be what happens to them throughout life, throughout this decade, that they just kind of orbit each other at a distance and never really make contact. Would that be okay, she's asking? Can we watch our phantoms like watching wild horses? Again, she's using the ghost phantom image again here. Again, thinking back to the hologram, that they keep encountering each other, but in a fleeting kind of virtual way. Orbiting each other, observing what seemed to them to be basically just the ghosts of the other person haunting them in some way, via social media, via media in general. She compares this, though, to watching wild horses. I'm not sure exactly what she means here. I've never done that. I'm not sure what part of watching our phantoms makes her think of watching wild horses. I guess except for the fact that of the wildness itself, this running around, this energy, but you certainly don't want to get in the way of them, so you watch them from a distance. Then she says, cooler in theory, but not if you force it to be. It just didn't happen. I must admit I'm not sure I fully understand what she means here. Cooler in theory. So there's a suggestion that this relationship sounds good in theory, but you can't force it. Is someone trying to force it? Are they trying to force it? Is she trying to force it? And maybe the moment's passed, but she ends that verse with, it just didn't happen.
Could it be enough to just float in your orbit? Can we watch our phantoms like watching wild horses? Cooler in theory, but not if you force it to be. It just didn't happen. So if you wanna break my cold, cold heart, say you loved me.
Here in the final repetition of the chorus, she changes the words a little, as she often will, to give them a slightly different meaning. So if you want to break my cold, cold heart, say you loved me. And if you want to tear my world apart, say you'll always wonder. Not you always wondered, but you'll always wonder. So this is now an ongoing thing. It's not just that he wondered what might have happened, he still wonders it. Also in the chorus earlier, she says, just say I loved you the way that you were. That will break my heart. Here she says, if you want to break my heart, say you loved me. And there's the directness of that and the simplicity of that compared with the earlier version in the earlier chorus. There's a much deeper sense of sadness in the way she says it. She lets it just fade away and hang there. Then she owns up. She owns up to her part of this because she says, because I wonder, will I always wonder?
So if you wanna break my cold, cold heart, say you loved me. And if you wanna tear my world apart, say you'll always wonder. 'Cause I wonder, will I always wonder?
So that's another very sad song, very melancholic. In this case, it's not a song that requires us to know a great deal about mythology or literature, but it's still beautifully written. A lot of really, really nice imagery in there. Not all of which I get, but that's fine. It's fairly obvious when you see this in the context of the whole album that this is most probably about her relationship with Matty Healy. I think we all know that. But despite that, despite the specificity of some of the elements in the song, nevertheless, it just paints this deeply tragic image of a relationship that didn't happen, that maybe could have happened, but the way these people's lives are somehow intertwined with each other. Once again, I think the music is really there mainly to support the lyrics and to support Taylor's vocals. I'm sure a musician or a producer might say they could have introduced more instruments here or done something or other with the production there. I really don't care. The heart of that song is the lyrics and Taylor's heartfelt vocals. As so often with Taylor's songs, there's a lot to think about there, a lot to work through. What would I have called this song? I don't know, maybe something like You've Always Wondered. I'm curious if you have some inkling as to why she chose this for the title. I'm not interested in, the rabbit hole of who's who in the song. But if you have some inkling as to why she might have chosen this as the title of the song rather than something else, please let me know in the comments.